Going.
Good, good. So we're talking about the program. I got to watch it a couple nights back, and I have to say it's one of the better documentaries on this subject that I've seen. I've seen some that don't really pour a lot of production into it. They're a little MacBooky. So I was very impressed with yours. I think the first question I want to ask is, how did you go down this path? I mean, I don't think someone wakes up and says, I'm going to dedicate my creative output to UAP discovery and disclosure. What sent you on this path?
Uh, so let me back up for a quick moment because you commented on the production value, and I wanted to talk about that briefly. I remember thinking, we've got this unprecedented push for government transparency, and the epicenter is Washington D.C. So I organized months in advance, got permits all across the city, contacted one of the best motion time lapse videographers in America. And I literally said to him, "Hey, you ever seen the show House of Cards on Netflix?" "Yeah." "You know those really cool motion time?" "Yeah." "I want this to look better than. Okay. So we had to rent a huge moving van, filled that thing to the gills for 5 weeks shooting all across B-roll, all across Washington, D.C., because I wanted it to have really high level production values and be really nice to look at and watch and entertain. And so I appreciate you making that comment because I went to great lengths to do that. Getting back to how I got involved with it, it's funny, it's one of the things that I'm learning uh, as I'm just completed my 6.5 documentary on the topic is never say never in terms of, when I set out back in the early 90s to do a documentary on this topic, it was only because I had a very good friend of mine who we were high school buddies. We graduated. We flew to Europe together. We went across Europe and we bought a car in London. We drove it all the way to Portugal, and we were really close. And then I stayed on for probably in Europe. I got some menial jobs, and he went home. And when I returned, roughly I don't know 8 months, a year later, he starts talking and rambling about UFOs and alien spacecraft and Roswell and all this stuff. And I literally said to myself, "This is really unfortunate. I think I just lost one of my best friends. Like this guy has lost his marbles." And it was really sad. I mean, I was really sad about it because I was just like, I'm gonna have to cut this guy loose. And at the time, I was working as an apprentice at a video production company, and I was doing like PSAs, public service announcements, and I was just a kind of a gopher and kind of learning the trade a little bit. And one of the guys that I looked up to at the place, this guy named Richard Van Sickle, and I was commenting on to him about how unfortunate it was that my friend has lost his mind. And and Richard goes, "Oh yeah, Roswell? You haven't heard about that?" I was like, "No, how would I know? I haven't heard about it. What? How would I have heard about it?" He goes, "Oh yeah, the military actually announced that they recovered a flying saucer." I said, "They did?" He goes, "Yeah, that's what they said." And then so I started kind of looking into it, and I was like, "Oh wow, they did actually do that." And the vast majority of people that were involved in the cover up later went on camera, and so I started looking into that. I went to a couple conferences, and I was like, "Wow, maybe there's something to this stuff." And then I decided to do a documentary on it. Everyone said I had lost my mind, and quite frankly, I don't blame them. And and that's how it kind of got started. And when I finished that after 4 years, I was like, never again. I sold it to Discovery Channel. It aired on the Learning Channel. I kind of got the last laugh. It's all good. And then then I got other opportunities to do another one, and then it just went on from there. And now I'm that guy.
Well, I do like the fact that the narrative has shifted
Yes.
from, you know, are they real? Is it real? To let's just talk about it. That the narrative has shifted to the point where it is a legitimate conversation. It's happening in Congress. It's happening at the highest levels of government. That we're actually having these conversations now, and it's not, is it real? It's, when will you tell us the full truth of what you know? And that's the basis of the program. Um, so give me a little insight into how what the conversation is now that disclosure activism has replaced conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I know it's crazy. I never thought that I'd be seriously sitting down with sitting members of Congress and asking them, do we have alien bodies and hardware in our possession? Like, never in 100 million years, and not be laughed out of the room and completely banned from any further discussions on the Hill. And I never thought that day would come, but here it is. And getting back to your talk about secrecy and what they know and what they don't know. I remember like 10 years ago, I was sitting down with this physicist, one of the intellectual heavyweights within the scientific community, who's dedicated decades of research into the phenomenon. And he said to me in passing, James, think of the secrecy more of a question of what we don't know than what we know. And that really kind of left an indelible impression on me. I thought, well, I've never looked at it that way. Right. So if you think about it, yes, okay, they come forward and they say, we've got, unequivocal concrete evidence that there are craft of unknown origin whizzing around in our airspace with impunity. They fly rings around our fastest jets. They exhibit a technology that's light years advanced from anything that we have. This dates back to at least the early 1940s, or some would argue a lot earlier than that. We have no idea who they are, where they come from, what they want. Shall they turn out to be hostile? We have no visible means of defense against them. Thank you and good night. Do you know what I mean? Like, just imagine for a moment if that's the case, if that's really true. Yeah, so sure, they know they're real, but that opens up the floodgates once they acknowledge that, which they kind of already have, to their vulnerabilities and exposing those vulnerabilities. And I think it's important for people like you and myself to think about those, to put ourselves in their position, right? To the justification for secrecy. Maybe they 75, 80 years ago thought the public's not ready. We need to figure out and learn more about what's going on before we disclose. There were some people on the inside that wanted it out. Other people argued against it. Some people tried, because people would always say, oh, well, if it were real, stuff would leak out. Well, stuff's been leaking out for a long time.
Yeah.
But now it's really kind of gotten to a whole new level. So
watching the documentary, everything does appear to be clearly focused on disclosure and on the battle between Congress and the Pentagon and independent contractors. Then in the middle, there's the Glasgow photograph and that story. I felt it was a tonal shift. I felt it took away from the overall message of the program. What was your decision on including that story?
Because I wanted to demonstrate the lengths that governments around the world go to cover up the more compelling evidence, like particularly photographic evidence. And there was a case that happened in 1990. During the time, there was a UFO desk at the Ministry of Defense in England, right? And they squashed it. It was 5 or 6 photographs, 2 witnesses, broad daylight, points of reference, right, of this object with a military jet circling around it, right? That would have exploded around the world. I mean, that's one of the best cases ever. And the government went out of their way to completely squash it and make that case vanish forever, right? And the Americans were involved. I had just come out of a number of meetings with intel folks that were part of the UAP task force, part of, I don't think Arrow, but part of the UAP task force, part of ATIP, that said unequivocally, I've seen the evidence, I've seen the photographic data, it's extremely compelling, it's 4K, and it's not being released, right? So I give an example of one that they squashed that did leak 34 years later. I thought that was I thought it was relevant to the storyline, right? And then, of course, you've got a guy, Gary McKinnon, who tried to steal the truth. He tried to penetrate those systems and hack into the most secretive government computers and find out if they really are sitting on this more compelling data. And yes, he got pay dirt, and he nearly spent the rest of his life in jail for it. So that was one of the reasons why, and just to kind of get out of, because the epicenter of the film really kind of revolves around the current effort that's happening for pushing for government transparency on this topic, but to get out and say this is actually a global thing, and so that was kind of my and a little eye candy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I did appreciate that too. One of the things I've noticed about documentaries that focus on this issue is there's a lot of American arrogance in them. Because the reason that, a government database exists of this footage of these encounters is because for military watchdog. So we want to make sure that another country doesn't have technology we don't have. That's why, the Air Force has all this stuff documented, because they want to see this and they want to say, well, wait, is that another power that has maneuverability in their aircraft that we don't have? They have another propulsion system we don't have. And there's always the American answer of no, obviously not. There's no way. But how do we frame that answer, that quick answer, in reference to the fact that we were still throwing rocks in the air when Sputnik was launched? Do you think it's possible that another superpower on Earth could have technology that's more advanced than ours that would mimic what we would think would be unexplained anomalous phenomena?
It's a great question, and it's a question that I've asked for decades. I asked it in China. I asked it in Russia to military generals in Russia and cosmonaut, and I made films about that. And the problem with that is that would mean that someone, because it's very well documented, has been in possession of this revolutionary, this technology that is light years advanced from anything that we even have today. And we can document it dating back to the 1940s. One of the things I did a film called The Phenomenon. And at the end of The Phenomenon, I juxtaposed a sighting that occurred with a colonel in the United States Air Force, Colonel William T. Coleman, who's actually part of the investigatory branch of the Air Force, Project Blue Book, during the latter 50s and early 60s. And he had a really dramatic encounter with a disc-shaped object in 1955 over Alabama while piloting a B-25 bomber. And his description of this craft and the type of technology that it exhibited, and I juxtaposed that with David Fravor, 2003, off the coast of San Diego, describing that Tic Tac and how it maneuvered. And it's exactly the same. They both talk about this. It exhibited technology that was just impossible. No wings, no visible means of propulsion, no noise, stopping on a dime, going from a standstill to out of sight in the blink of an eye, right angle turns at high speed, absolute parallel, 80 years apart or whatever it was, 50 plus years apart. So demonstrating, so if someone is in possession of that technology, they've kept it pretty well hidden for over 80 years. And that's a story in itself, because these things are not flying around on Jet A fuel.
Right. I did notice in the footage of the craft that was caught in Colombian airspace, if you look at that footage, you can see propulsion at the back of that ship. And I noticed you didn't really dive into that particular story. Is that covered in another one of your documentaries?
Is that the where it passes past the window of the airplane?
I saw it in the still, and it's center frame, and you can see two little on the back. Not the one over Bogota, but the one immediately following it.
There's a guy actually that's doing an extensive that actually went down and interviewed that pilot, and there's going to be some more information coming out in that case. I put in various UFO clips from around the world, primarily as eye candy. I did not do a deep dive into it, but it's still compelling stuff.
I would agree with that. We are running low on time, so I think I'd want to ask, do you know if there are your level of queries and deep dives happening in other countries? And are we going to see a global push for this sort of disclosure moving forward? Because this is, as many people mentioned in the documentary, a global issue. It's going to change the way we consider not only our neighbors, but our belief systems. So do you see a global force assembling for this?
I think it's one of the topics that really kind of unites us. It transcends politics, it transcends religion. I mean, it's a real breath of fresh air to see Democrats working with Republicans on the Hill, being civil to one another. I went to China. I met with generals in China. They were very open with me about the phenomenon existing there as well. At the time, in the late 90s, I went to Russia. I met with multiple city military generals there, Star City, Russia. They talked about it openly. Obviously, since Putin's come in, it's been a little bit more closed. They had congressional hearings in Brazil. There was a push in 2007 and 2008, both France and England, FOIA requests, the release of previously classified documents on the topic. So yes, that's happening. But I think at this point in the game, America's kind of leading the way.
And I'm going to squeeze one more question in. I've noticed there's been an uptick in what we have learned as far as disclosure in the past 4 years. Do you think that's going to change when there's a changing of the guard in January of 2025 at the presidential level?
Well, he's bringing in people like Rubio and Ratcliffe, and they've expressed a willingness to be more transparent regarding this topic. I'm told through whistleblowers that there have been many meetings with Rubio. I don't think Gillibrand as much. Rubio, Rounds, part of the Gang of Eight, Schumer. I'm trying to think of the other senators, and certainly members of Congress that have met with firsthand witnesses. So I'm anticipating that there's going to be probably more transparency with the other administration on this topic.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate talking to you. I had a great chat, and best of luck with the documentary.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
All right, man. Take care.